comfort level at just sitting here and talking to my peeps about what it is to grow old, to remember that my title that I chose for this series of conversations with 87 years old, and I'm not done yet. And we talked about how humor is used both to make fun of adults over 80, those of us that are well seasoned, and the jokes that we share amongst ourselves, which we know because we paid our dues. I also touched on some other issues that were far from comedic, but today I took a deep breath because I wanted to talk about something really special in my mind, and that is what it's like to remember a life well lived. And I'm not talking about everything was perfect along the way, because we've all had speed bumps and high points in our lives. But in looking back, can we say it's been a life well lived? My wife and I are what I would call nomads, because we have been able to uproot, change not only cities or states, but even immigrating to Canada and then coming back. So for us, it was that drive. But then there's another group of people that stayed home and provided the home base. And a lot of those people that did that, I put my sister in that category. She's lived in different houses, but her home base has remained the same. But what happens when that remembering a life well lived is suddenly interrupted? How do we anticipate? I know in future episodes I want to talk about, for example, what happens if the money runs out, or government policies change and suddenly the income stream is reduced. But for today I wanted to choose another example, and that is, let me think about this from the point of view of a woman. I'll use as an example, a construct, if you will, about a person who grew up in the Midwest, married, had children, had a long marriage. Her husband worked hard building a business and developing a home. And they had this large home when suddenly he developed an illness and he died. We like to think that we're ready when somebody has an illness, and we're told that there's an endpoint in that process. We like to think that we're ready because, after all, the doctor said it's going to happen, and it did. But are we really ready? Now imagine the woman sitting alone in this large family home that was once filled with noise of a family, children growing up, making the sounds that young children do and then growing children do. And then they leave home, and suddenly, but it's still home. It's still a place of memories. I'm sure that the woman looked around and things were familiar reminders of that time, building a life and a family, but now it all looks different. What happens? It might be walking around this home that's now empty, and it's not as difficult to clean up. It's just you preparing a meal. Imagine sitting at a table with a meal. It's pretty difficult to imagine. then there are pictures and looking at souvenirs. And suddenly, those things become memories of a loss. Maybe the children that were gone or children nearby come in and they want to check in to make sure that mother's okay. But that's not the same as being independent and choosing to be independent. It's just alone. And then suddenly the reality sets in. What do I do now? I didn't prepare for this. Nobody did. I looked around. Is there a notebook? And it says at a certain time, you turn to page 218, and there it is, the instructions on what to do. I doubt that such a notebook exists. And if it did, I certainly want to make sure I can check Amazon and buy a copy. But that's not my point. My point is that suddenly the situation is combining to create this environment, this space that was once kind of a, dare I call it sacred space, because it's home, it's family, and in a lot of ways you might consider it sacred. And now she's alone. Maybe in the back of her mind she knows that there are some hard choices ahead. Can she live alone in this large house? Imagine the size of a house, maybe 3 or 4 bedrooms, and a playroom or a den or whatever the configuration of the house is. But suddenly it's just this large place and a single solitary person. It could be a man alone whose wife had passed. It doesn't make any difference what the gender is. The point I'm thinking is what it's like to suddenly be faced with this change that none of us predicted. Do I choose to stay? Maybe bring in some help. I have some money. I could hire somebody to come in and do the cleaning. I could hire somebody to come in and make sure I'm okay. But what about that seems off? And I'm going to stop at this point to see what the recording looks like and whether I want to continue with this. Well, I've decided I want to keep recording again because the subject is just too important to me, and part of some of those faces we don't like to talk about, but we need to talk about it. Those people like you and I that are 80 years old and over, age, it could be 70, but it's preparing. The woman that I made up living in the Midwest and now is faced with, what do I do? I could stay here and with help I could do just fine. But do I want to wander around this large house and just now memories of loss along with memories of comfort, but it just somehow doesn't seem like where I want to be. Now, I talked early on in the video about my wife and I, so people call us the vagabonds. We were able to pick up and move and change and do many things because we weren't tied down for reasons not to go into here. We couldn't have children, but we had a great career, both of us working in social work and with children. That allowed us to make a lot of moves and leaps that would have been impossible for somebody with a family that needed the solid base and structure of a home, the way this woman that I've imagined would be thinking. But now, she's done her job. She has provided a rock solid base and a place where the family could grow, the children could leave, but they had a place to come back if they wanted to, because it was a place that she and her husband had provided until now. Maybe I can offer just a glimpse of what it's like to be a nomad, and maybe suggest that this woman, or it could be a man. I made her up for the story, but what if now she could take on the life of a nomad? I'm not talking about packing everything in a Winnebago and driving off into the sunset, but something as simple as moving to a smaller place, a place where she might be surrounded by friends. And the best part of all is that she doesn't have to put all of those memories and souvenirs into a box and lock them up and never see them again unless she chooses to pull them out on a special day and remember. There are some things that are so important that you want to take along, but what if there's a place, maybe it's an independent living facility, assuming the person is capable of living independently, or in a facility with more assistance, if that's what's needed. And somehow we become so reluctant to give that a thought, because it seems like we're abandoning that base, that rock solid base, and taking a leap into becoming a nomad. There's no answer to that covers everybody. Each of us have to come up with our own game plan around that. What I do know is that keeping our minds open to change for that nomadic leap that's necessary. That's what's important about choosing to carry on. Because the house was a house. It was a home once. Maybe it's just a house now. Maybe home is where you take your treasures, where you take your memories, where you take your pictures, and find a place that means something to you and you alone. We'll touch on this later, but I think that's what I wanted to say for today. I'm Chuck Waldron, and I really like spending this time sharing some thoughts about that. I hope you do too, and leave a comment. Tell me, am I making sense? Not making sense? You like what I'm saying? You don't like what I'm saying? Just leave a comment and let me know. I read the comments. Yes, John Waldron, I do. I read the comments. You guys are special to me, my peeps. Those of us that have reached a certain age and have decided we're just not done yet. For now, take care.